There is a moment, and I want you to think about this right now, when you realize that the life you are living is not quite the life you imagined for yourself. Maybe it happened this morning when you looked in the mirror. Maybe it happened last night when you sat alone with your thoughts and felt a quiet, persistent sense that something is missing. Maybe it has been happening for years, slowly, like a river carving rock, not dramatic, not loud, but constant. And you have been waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right teacher, the right book, or maybe just the right 10 minutes to sit down and genuinely ask yourself, what is it going to take to change? Well, my friend, I want to tell you something from the very first breath of this conversation. That moment is right now, and if you stay with me, the next few minutes might be the most important you have spent in a very long time. I am Jim Rohn, and I have spent the better part of my life studying why some people build extraordinary lives and why others, with equal or greater natural talent, seem to drift. I have spoken to millions of people across every corner of this world, and I can tell you that the gap between the life you have and the life you want is never as large as it feels. It is bridged, almost always, by a single lesson, one idea applied with consistency. Subscribe to this channel if you are serious about closing that gap, because what I'm going to share with you today might be the 10-minute lesson that changes the next 10 years of your life. Stay with me. Every word matters. Let me begin with something I learned very early in my life, back when I was a young man in Idaho, working on a farm, wondering why some families seemed to thrive while others, hard-working, decent, God-fearing people, seemed to struggle year after year. I did not yet have the language to explain what I was observing, but I had the eyes. And what I saw was this: the difference was not luck. The difference was not talent. The difference was not even education, though education plays its part. The difference was philosophy. The way a person thinks about life determines the quality of life they experience. It is that simple, and yet it is the most overlooked truth in every conversation about success, happiness, and human potential. A man can have the finest tools in the world and still build a crooked house if his measurements are wrong. And a person can have every opportunity laid at their feet and still miss every single one of them if their mental framework, their personal philosophy, is not designed to recognize opportunity for what it is. I want you to really sit with that idea for a moment. Your philosophy is the lens through which you see the world. Change the lens and you change everything you see. Change what you see and you change how you act. Change how you act and you change what you get. It is not magic. It is not mystery. It is cause and effect, and once you understand that your thoughts are the first cause in the chain of your life, you will never again feel quite as powerless as perhaps you have felt before. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, Jim, I have heard this kind of thing before. I have read the books, watched the videos, gone to the seminars. And yet here I am, still in the same place. I hear you. I understand that frustration deeply because I lived it myself. Before I met my mentor, Earl Schoaf, at the age of 25, I was in debt, I had no savings, I had vague dreams and absolutely no plan for reaching them. I was what you might call a willing victim of my own lack of discipline. And when Mr. Schoaf sat down across from me and began asking me questions about my life, about my goals, about my habits and my daily routines, I began to understand something that changed everything. He did not ask me what I wanted. He asked me what I was doing. Because in the gap between what we want and what we do lies every unfulfilled dream in human history. Think about that. The distance between your dream and your reality is filled with one thing, and one thing only: the actions you have not yet taken. And most of the time, those actions are not grand or heroic. They are small. They are daily. They are the things that are easy to do and, as I have said many times, equally easy not to do. That is the great paradox of personal development. The actions that build an extraordinary life are almost never dramatic. They are almost always simple. But simple is not the same as easy, and that distinction matters more than anything I will say to you today. Let me give you a picture that I have used with audiences around the world because it captures this truth better than almost anything I know. Imagine two farmers. They live side by side, same soil, same climate, same seeds available at the same store in the same town. The first farmer gets up every morning and tends to his fields. He waters when he should water, he weeds when he should weed, he checks on his crops not when it is convenient but when it is necessary. He does not do anything spectacular. He is not working 17 hours a day. He is not grinding himself to dust. He is simply doing what needs to be done, consistently, day after day. The second farmer is not a bad person. He is not lazy in the way we typically think of laziness. He works hard on the days he works. But he works inconsistently. Some mornings he sleeps in because the night before was long. Some weeks he tends to his fields faithfully, and other weeks he convinces himself that the fields will be fine for a few more days. He tells himself he will catch up. He tells himself that he deserves a break. He is not wrong about the break. Everyone deserves rest, but his resting and his working have become confused, and the discipline that should organize his days has been replaced by mood. Now, here is the extraordinary thing about this picture. For the first several weeks, you would look at both farms and see almost no difference. The consistent farmer and the inconsistent farmer look, from the outside, remarkably similar. This is the cruel trick that time plays on us in the early stages of a new discipline. We begin doing the right things, and nothing dramatic happens immediately, and so we question whether the right things are really worth doing. This is precisely the moment when most people quit. They quit just before the compound interest of daily discipline begins to show up in their lives. But come harvest time, come the season of results, the two farms look nothing alike. One is abundant. The other is struggling. And the difference was never one single day. The difference was the accumulation of all the days. Now here is a question I want you to sit with. Have you been farming your life like that first farmer, or like the second one? And before you answer too quickly, I want you to be gentle with yourself but completely honest. Because most of us, if we are truthful, have been a little bit of both. We are consistent in some areas and wildly inconsistent in others. We have built beautiful fields in certain corners of our lives and left other fields entirely untended. Maybe your health has been the untended field. Maybe it is your finances. Maybe it is your relationships. Maybe it is your spiritual or intellectual growth. Whatever it is, I want you to know that the moment you recognize the untended field is not a moment of failure. It is a moment of power. Because you cannot change what you cannot see, and you cannot fix what you have not first honestly acknowledged. This channel exists for people who are ready to look honestly at their fields and decide which ones they're going to tend. Stay with us and subscribe, because in the next few minutes I'm going to share something that will give you the exact framework for knowing where to begin. Now let me talk about something that I believe is the single most underrated force in human life, and that is the force of environment. I have watched this across decades of studying successful and unsuccessful people. I have watched it in the lives of my students, my friends, my family, and in my own life. And I have come to this conclusion without any hesitation. You cannot consistently outperform your environment. I want you to hear that again. You cannot consistently outperform your environment. You can rise above it in moments. You can, through sheer willpower, resist its pull for a season. But over the long arc of your life, the environment you inhabit, the people you spend time with, the information you consume, the conversations you engage in, the physical spaces you occupy, shapes you in ways that are so subtle and so constant that most people never even notice it happening. It is like the temperature of the room you are in. You do not feel it changing degree by degree, but leave for 3 hours and walk back in, and you will immediately know whether the room is warmer or cooler than it was. Your environment changes you the same way, slowly, invisibly, powerfully. I will tell you a story. When I was a young man, before my encounter with Mr. Shove, I had a group of friends who were wonderful people. Genuinely kind, genuinely good-hearted. But they had a philosophy of life, never explicitly stated, never written down anywhere, but present in every conversation, every choice, every joke, that said, "This is as good as it gets for people like us. Do not reach too high. Do not want too much. Do not be the person who thinks he is better than everyone else." And because I loved these people, and because I spent most of my time in their company, I absorbed that philosophy the way a plant absorbs sunlight. Slowly, completely, without ever consciously deciding to. And it expressed itself in my life as a quiet resignation, a comfortable mediocrity, a willingness to dream small dreams and feel vaguely guilty about the larger ones. It was not until I sat across from Earl Shove, a man whose very presence radiated possibility, whose philosophy was entirely different, who genuinely believed that a 25-year-old farm kid from Idaho could build something extraordinary, that I began to realize my environment had been quietly setting my ceiling for years without my permission. And I want to ask you, gently but seriously, whose philosophy have you been absorbing? Whose ceiling have you been treating as your own? Because the conversations we are surrounded by, the expectations of the people closest to us, the stories we hear repeated most often, these become, over time, the walls of our world. I am not saying to abandon the people you love. I would never say that. The relationships in our lives are among its greatest treasures, and I will speak much more about the art of relationships as we continue. But I am saying this, you must be intentional about the voices you let have consistent access to your mind. You must curate, deliberately and with respect, the information environment you live in. Because your mind is not just a processor of what comes in, it is a manufacturer. It takes the raw material of what you feed it and builds your beliefs, your expectations, your identity. Feed it poverty thinking and it will build a poverty identity. Feed it excellence, possibility, and disciplined thinking, and it will begin, not all at once, but surely and steadily, to build something different. This is why I have always said that formal education makes you a living, but self-education makes you a fortune. Not just financially, though financial abundance is certainly one of the fruits of a well-cultivated mind. I mean that self-directed, intentional, consistent learning remakes you from the inside. It changes what you notice, what you value, what you tolerate, and what you reach for. And all of that changes everything. Very soon I'm going to walk you through something that I call the architecture of a transformed life, the specific pillars that, when built together, create a life that most people only dream about. But first I want to address something that I know is in the minds of many of you who are watching this today. Some of you are carrying a particular kind of weight, the weight of years that have already passed. You are looking at your age, whatever it is, and you are doing a kind of mental arithmetic that is deeply unkind to yourself. You are calculating how many years you have lost, how much time has already gone, how far behind you are compared to where you thought you would be by now. And I want to speak directly to that feeling because I know it well. I felt it at 25 when I realized I had very little to show for years of effort. I felt it again at various turns in my life when progress seemed slower than I needed it to be. But here is what I have learned, and what I want to pass to you as clearly as I possibly can. The past cannot be renegotiated, but it can be reframed. And the reframe I am offering you is this: every year that has passed has not been wasted. It has been teaching you something, equipping you with something, carving you into the particular shape of person that you now are. The question is not whether those years were lost. They were not lost. They were lived. The question is what you are going to do with everything those years have given you, the resilience, the understanding, the specific kind of wisdom that only comes from having actually lived through difficulty. That is not nothing. That is, in many ways, everything. Now I want to talk about the concept that I have probably spoken about more than any other in my career, and that is the concept of personal development. Not as a category of books or seminars, but as a fundamental commitment to the daily improvement of the most important project you will ever work on, which is yourself. I have always said that working hard on your job makes you a living, but working hard on yourself makes you a fortune. And I mean that in the fullest sense of the word fortune, not merely money, but the rich, deep, textured abundance that comes from a life fully inhabited by a person fully developed. Think about the difference between a person who knows a little about many things and a person who has gone deep, genuinely deep, in the areas that matter most of the life they want to live. The person who has gone deep has not just accumulated knowledge. They have accumulated a kind of capability that compounds. Every new thing they learn connects to something they already know deeply, creating webs of understanding that produce insights, solutions, and opportunities that the surface-level person simply cannot see. This is why reading, consistent, intentional, disciplined reading, is not just a hobby or a luxury. It is a survival skill for anyone who wants to build something meaningful with their life. I made a commitment years ago to read something valuable every single day. Not because every book was transformative. Some were not. But because the habit of feeding my mind quality thinking, consistently, changed the quality of my own thinking in ways I could not have predicted and cannot fully measure. Here is a question I want you to hold on to, because the answer to it might be the most honest assessment of your life you have made in years. What have you been putting into your mind in the last 90 days? Not just passively, through the news and social media and the ambient noise of modern life, but intentionally, deliberately, with purpose. What books have you read? What mentors have you listened to? What conversations have you sought out with people who are living the kind of life you want to live? If the answer is honest, and the honest answer is not much, then I want you to know that this is one of the most actionable things you can change starting today. Starting tonight. You do not need a library or a course or a program. You need a decision. A decision that your mind is worth feeding. A decision that the ideas you carry around in your head are worth upgrading the way you would upgrade any other important tool. Because your mind is not just a tool, it is the tool. Everything else you use in your life is operated by your mind, and the quality of what you build with any tool is only as good as the skill and the thinking of the person holding it. Let me shift now to something that is deeply personal to me, and that is the relationship between values and direction. I have worked with thousands of people over the decades who were stuck, not because they lacked ambition, not because they lacked intelligence, and not even because they lacked the basic skills required to move forward. They were stuck because their values and their actions were in conflict. They said they valued their health, but they were not taking actions consistent with that value. They said they valued their family, but their schedule told a very different story. They said they valued financial freedom, but their spending habits were building a cage, not a door. And this conflict, this gap between the values we profess and the values we actually live, creates a kind of internal friction that exhausts us without ever producing movement. It is like driving a car with the handbrake on. You press the accelerator, you hear the engine working, you might even move a little, but you are fighting yourself the whole time and burning through energy that should be going into forward momentum. The solution, when I have watched it work in people's lives, is almost always not more effort. It is alignment. When your daily actions finally begin to reflect your deepest values, when the way you spend your Tuesday morning is a genuine expression of what you say matters most to you, something shifts. The friction decreases. Progress stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a river finding its natural course. I have seen this transformation happen in people who had been struggling for years. It did not require more willpower. It required more honesty. It required sitting down and asking, what do I actually value, and what do my actual choices reveal about what I value? And when the two answers differ significantly, it required the courage to close that gap. In just a moment, I want to share with you one of the most practical frameworks I have ever developed for anyone trying to close that gap between where they are and where they want to be. But first, I want to acknowledge something. I know that some of you who are watching this today are not simply looking for motivation. You are looking for a way out of a specific difficulty. Maybe you are in a financial situation that feels genuinely desperate. Maybe your health has declined in ways that frighten you. Maybe a relationship that once felt like the foundation of your life has cracked or crumbled, and you are trying to figure out how to rebuild not just the relationship but yourself. I want to speak to you directly and tell you this: the principles I am sharing today are not reserved for people who are already doing well and just want to do better. These principles were born out of struggle. My philosophy of life was forged in the specific heat of failure, debt, and the particular humiliation of a young man who had big dreams and very little to show for them. Everything I know about building a meaningful life, I know because I had to learn it the hard way. And everything I know tells me that no matter how difficult your current circumstance, the principles of philosophy, discipline, consistency, environment, and daily growth apply. In fact, they apply most powerfully precisely when the circumstances are hardest. Because it is in the hardest circumstances that the discipline to think clearly, the habit of personal development, and the quality of your associations matter most. The storm does not test the house that has never been challenged. The storm reveals exactly how well the house was built. Now let me talk about something that I believe is the great equalizer of human life, and that is time. Every person on this earth, the richest and the most impoverished, the most powerful and the most overlooked, receives the exact same allocation of time each day. 24 hours. No more, no less. And the extraordinary thing is that most people live their entire lives without ever truly reckoning with that fact. They spend their time as though it were unlimited, as though there will always be more, as though the things they are postponing today will somehow be easier or more available tomorrow. I understand this impulse. I had it myself. It is one of the most natural and most dangerous habits of the human mind. We are built for the present moment, and the future feels abstract and far away, and so the urgency of today, the immediate demands, the comfortable routines, the path of least resistance, consistently wins against the more important but less urgent work of building our future. One of the most important things I ever did for myself was to begin treating time the way a serious investor treats money. An investor does not spend money carelessly and then hope there will be enough left over to invest. A serious investor decides first how much to invest and then lives on what remains. The same discipline applied to time changes everything. Decide first how much time you are going to invest in your learning, in your relationships, in your health, in your craft, and then let the rest of your life fill in around that investment. Because what you invest your time in is what grows. And what you grow is what you ultimately become. Very soon I will be sharing with you what I consider to be the 5 pillars of a designed life. The specific disciplines that, when practiced consistently, transform not just what you achieve but who you are. But I want to make sure you feel something before I give you the framework. Because frameworks without feeling are just information, and information alone has never changed a life. What changes lives is inspiration married to information. It is the moment when an idea not only makes sense to your mind, but also catches fire in your heart. So let me ask you this. Is there a version of your life, a version you can genuinely see and feel when you close your eyes and let yourself dream honestly, that is significantly richer, more alive, more purposeful, more connected, more abundant than the one you are currently living? If you are honest, and I think you are, the answer is yes. That vision is not a fantasy. It is not naive. It is information. It is your intuition telling you what is possible for you based on who you are and what you are capable of. The only question that remains is whether you are willing to do the daily work of becoming the person that version of your life requires. Because that is always the real question. Not can it be done, but will you do what it takes to do it? The first pillar, and I want to walk through each one of these with real depth because each one deserves its own conversation. The first pillar is what I call a compelling vision. Not a goal, though goals are part of it. A vision. Goals are specific and measurable and time-bound, and all of that is valuable. But a vision is something larger. A vision is the picture of who you are becoming and what kind of life you are building across years and decades, not just quarters and years. A compelling vision does something that a goal alone cannot do. It gives meaning to the difficult days. And there will be difficult days. There are always difficult days. The question is whether those difficult days are lived in the context of something larger that makes them worth enduring. I have found, in watching thousands of people navigate the challenges of building meaningful lives, that the people who sustain their effort through adversity are almost always the people who have a clear and emotionally compelling picture of what they are building toward. They can see it. They can feel it. They return to it on the days when everything seems to be working against them, and they let that vision remind them of why the work matters. The people who give up, most of the time, are not giving up because the challenge is too hard. They are giving up because the challenge is too hard relative to a reason that was never made vivid enough to sustain them. Make your vision vivid. Write it down. Not just in abstract terms, but in sensory, emotional, specific detail. What does your life look like 5 years from now if everything goes the way it should? Who is with you? Where are you? What are you doing? How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Give your future self a home in your imagination, and you will find that your present self becomes far more willing to make the sacrifices that future requires. The second pillar is disciplined daily action. And I know that word, discipline, carries connotations for some people that feel heavy, punitive, almost military. I want to offer you a different relationship with that word. Discipline, as I understand it and as I have practiced it and taught it, is simply the bridge between your intentions and your results. It is the set of daily habits and practices that, when maintained, convert your vision from an image in your mind into a reality in the world. The great challenge with discipline is not finding the actions to take. Most people know, at some level, what they should be doing. The challenge is the consistency. It is the Friday afternoon when you are tired and you have a choice between the discipline and the comfort. It is the Tuesday morning when nobody is watching and you could skip the reading, skip the exercise, skip the review of your goals, and nothing bad would happen, not today. This is where character is built or eroded. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the small ones. I have always said that motivation gets you started, but discipline keeps you going. And discipline is, at its core, a form of self-respect. When you honor your commitments to yourself, when you do what you said you would do, even when the feeling has faded, even when no one else would know, you are making a deposit in the account of your own self-regard. And those deposits compound the same way financial investments compound. Over time, A person who consistently honors their commitments to themselves develops a level of self-trust that becomes one of their greatest assets. They know, in a way that is bone-deep and unshakable, that they can be counted on. And when you know you can be counted on by yourself, the whole character of your engagement with life changes. The third pillar is the quality of your associations. I have already touched on this in our conversation about environment, but I want to go deeper because I think this is one of the areas where people most often give themselves permission not to act. We understand, intellectually, that the people closest to us influence us profoundly. We nod when we hear that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. But then we go home and we do nothing about it, because changing our associations feels socially difficult, emotionally loaded, and even slightly disloyal. I want to address that discomfort head-on. You do not have to abandon anyone. You do not have to make dramatic announcements or burn bridges. What you do have to do is make intentional decisions about who gets your most consistent, most valuable time and attention. This is not about being calculating or cold in your relationships. It is about recognizing that your most precious resource, your time, is finite, and that the people who consistently occupy that time will shape you in ways both obvious and invisible. So the question is not whether to invest your time in relationships. Of course you should. The question is whether the relationships you are investing in are ones that pull you toward the best version of yourself or ones that make that version feel unnecessary. Seek out people who are living the kind of life you want to build. Study them. Listen to them. Learn from them. Be useful to them. Extraordinary people, in my experience, are almost always willing to share what they know with someone who is genuinely hungry to learn and who approaches them with respect and a spirit of contribution. The fourth pillar, and this one is perhaps the most personally meaningful to me, is continuous learning. I have read thousands of books in my lifetime. I have filled notebooks with the ideas of great thinkers, philosophers, historians, scientists, poets, and business builders. And I can tell you without hesitation that the habit of reading, the habit of sitting with great ideas and wrestling with them and applying them, has given me more leverage in my life than almost any other single practice. There is something extraordinary that happens in the mind of a person who reads consistently. It is not just that they accumulate more information. It is that their capacity for nuance, for seeing complexity, for holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, grows. They become better thinkers. And better thinking produces better decisions. And better decisions, over time, produce better lives. I want to issue you a specific challenge. For the next 30 days, commit to reading for 30 minutes every day. Not scrolling. Not watching. Reading. A physical book or something that requires your focused attention and demands that you form your own images and draw your own conclusions. At the end of 30 days, if you have kept the commitment, you will notice something. You will notice that your mind feels sharper. You will notice that you have new ideas where before you had only old habits. And you will have built 30 days of a habit that, if continued, will transform the landscape of your mind in ways that no single 30-minute session could reveal. The fifth pillar is what I call the discipline of contribution. And this is the one that surprises people most when I include it in the architecture of a successful life, because it seems to belong to a different category, to charity, to spirituality, to something beyond the practical work of building a meaningful existence. But I have found, without exception, in my own life and in the lives of the most successful and fulfilled people I have ever known, that the discipline of giving, of contributing value to others, of genuinely caring about the development and well-being of the people around you, is not separate from a successful life. It is one of its deepest engines. When you are oriented toward service, when your question is not only, how can I get more? But also, how can I give more? How can I be more valuable? How can I add to the lives of others? Something remarkable happens. Your own capacity grows. Your own perspective expands. Your own sense of purpose deepens in ways that no amount of personal achievement alone can produce. I have seen wealthy people who were profoundly empty, and I have seen people of modest means who were overflowing with richness, and the distinguishing factor, more times than I can count, was this: the rich life was being lived in the context of service, and the empty life was being lived in the context of pure self-focus. This is not a moral lecture. It is an observation about human psychology and human flourishing. We are built for contribution. It is written into our deepest nature. And when we live in accordance with that nature, when our lives are organized not just around getting but also around giving, we access a quality of motivation, resilience, and joy that self-focused striving simply cannot produce. In just a few moments, I want to bring all of these pillars together into a single, practical picture that you can take away from this conversation and begin applying today. But first I want to talk about something that I think deserves its own space in our conversation, and that is the relationship between patience and urgency. Because these two things seem contradictory, and yet both are absolutely essential to a life that works. The urgency is this: you do not have infinite time. Whatever it is you want to build, whatever it is you want to become, the clock is running. Not to frighten you, but to remind you that the gap between your dream and your reality does not close on its own. It requires action. It requires consistent, daily action, beginning now. Not next Monday, not after the holiday, not when the circumstances are a little better. The urgency is real, and it is your ally if you use it wisely. But here is the paradox, and this took me years to fully understand, that urgency must be paired with patience. Not the patience of postponement, not the patience that says, "I will do this someday," but the patience of a farmer who plants in spring without demanding the harvest by summer. The patience of a craftsman who does not abandon a project because it is taking longer than expected. The patience of a person who has made a commitment and keeps it not because the results are already visible but because the process is trustworthy. Urgency without patience becomes anxiety, and anxiety is one of the most potent inhibitors of the clear thinking and disciplined action that your growth requires. Patience without urgency becomes complacency, and complacency is the slow death of every dream that was never pursued. The master practitioner of a designed life holds both: the urgency to act today and the patience to trust the process even when the evidence is not yet visible. Now I want to talk about failure, because I have noticed that in conversations about building a great life, failure is often treated as the enemy. It is the thing to be avoided, the proof that something went wrong, the signal to retreat and reassess and possibly give up. I want to offer you a completely different relationship with failure, because the relationship you have with failure will determine, more than almost anything else, how far you ultimately go. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of the path to success. It is information. It is feedback. It is the world telling you, sometimes harshly, where your strategy, your execution, or your thinking needs adjustment. Every person I have ever admired, every leader, every builder, every artist, every entrepreneur whose work has genuinely moved the world, has a catalog of failures. Some of them have quite spectacular failures. Failures that cost them money, reputation, relationships, years of their lives. And what distinguishes them from the people who were stopped by those failures is not that they felt no pain. They felt it. It is not that they had no doubt. They had enormous doubt. What distinguishes them is that they chose to treat failure as curriculum rather than verdict. They asked, "What does this teach me? What does this require me to change? What strength have I discovered in myself in the process of surviving this?" And then they used the answers to those questions as fuel for the next attempt. I want to encourage you to build that same relationship with your own setbacks. Every difficulty you have navigated has taught you something. Every failure has developed in you a capacity that the easy path would never have produced. Your history of struggle is not a liability. It is an asset. The question is whether you are drawing on it. Let me also say something about the people who are going to doubt you. Because if you decide today to take your development seriously, if you decide to close the gap between the life you have and the life you are capable of, there will be people who question that decision. Some of them will question it loudly and openly. Others will do it quietly, with raised eyebrows and gentle discouragement disguised as concern. I want you to be prepared for this. Not hardened against it, but prepared. Because doubt from others is one of the most reliable early signs that you are making a genuine change. Comfortable people tend to be threatened by change in others, not because they are bad people, but because your decision to grow implies, without your saying a word, that growth was possible all along, and that is an uncomfortable thought for someone who has not made that choice. Do not resent them for it. Understand it. Have compassion for it. But do not let it redirect you. Because your life, the only life you will ever get to live, is far too important and far too brief to be lived according to someone else's comfort level. I want to close this part of our conversation with something that has stayed with me for decades, something that I believe captures the essence of everything we have been discussing. I once heard it said that success is not to be pursued, it is to be attracted by the person you become. I want to sit with you in that idea for a moment. We spend so much of our lives chasing outcomes, the promotion, the income level, the relationship, the recognition, the achievement. And chasing is exhausting. It creates a kind of poverty consciousness, a perpetual sense of not enough, of almost but not quite, of success always being slightly ahead of where you are. But when you shift your focus from chasing outcomes to building yourself, when you commit to daily development, to disciplined action, to quality thinking and quality associations, something remarkable begins to happen. The outcomes start coming to you. Not because of magic, but because a developed person creates value wherever they go, and value, genuine, consistent, visible value, attracts opportunity the way flowers attract bees. You do not have to chase what you attract, and you attract what you become. So the greatest investment you will ever make is not in a stock or a property or a business, as important as all of those things may be. The greatest investment you will ever make is in the daily, disciplined, joyful development of yourself. My friends, if there is one thing I hope you carry with you from everything I have shared today, let it be this: you are not finished becoming who you are capable of becoming. Not at 30. Not at 50. Not at 70. The architecture of a transformed life is available to anyone with the courage to lay its foundation one brick at a time. It does not require perfection. It does not require dramatic gestures or overnight transformations. It requires a decision, the daily, renewed, unshakable decision to be a little better today than you were yesterday. That is it. That simple, that profound, and that completely within your power. The world does not need more people who know what to do. The world needs more people who consistently do what they know. I hope that today, in whatever small or large way, you take one step closer to being that person. Not for me. Not for anyone watching. For yourself. Because you deserve a life that reflects the full measure of your potential, and that life is waiting for you on the other side of your daily discipline. If this conversation has sparked something in you, if even one idea has landed in a way that feels true and important, then I want you to continue this journey with us. This channel is a library of lessons, conversations, and frameworks drawn from a lifetime of studying what makes human beings truly flourish. Every video we create is designed to give you something real, something practical, something that you can take into your Tuesday morning and your Thursday evening and your quiet Sunday when you are thinking about the week ahead. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave a comment below telling me which of the 5 pillars resonates most deeply with you. I read those comments. I learn from what you share. And together, in this community of people who have decided that their best is still ahead of them, we will keep building lives worth living. Thank you for your time today. It is the most valuable thing you have, and I do not take lightly that you chose to spend a portion of it here. Until next time, keep going, keep growing. The harvest is coming. The burning desire to use it. And I can tell you, after all of those conversations, after all of those years of observation and study and reflection, that the gap between the life you have and the life you want is never as large as it feels from the inside. It is bridged, almost always, by a single lesson applied with patience and consistency. Not a secret. Not a hack. Not something that requires extraordinary circumstances or extraordinary resources. A lesson. An idea. A shift in the way you see yourself and the world you inhabit. Subscribe to this channel right now if you are genuinely serious about closing that gap, because what I'm going to share with you today could very well be the 10-minute lesson, though we will spend considerably more than 10 minutes together, because this topic deserves real depth that changes the trajectory of the next 10 years of your life. Stay with me. Every word in this conversation has been chosen because it matters. Let me begin at the beginning, not the beginning of my career or my philosophy, but the beginning of the understanding that made everything else possible. I was 25 years old. I was living in Caldwell, Idaho, working a job that paid just enough to keep me in place, but not enough to move me forward. I had a wife I loved, a young family I adored, and dreams that I kept carefully folded in the back of my mind like letters I was not yet ready to mail. I was not unhappy in the way that is loud and obvious. My unhappiness was of the quieter, more insidious variety, the kind that wears the face of contentment while slowly, day by day, convincing you that the life you are living is probably as good as you can reasonably expect. I had debt. Not catastrophic debt, but debt that sat on my shoulders with the comfortable familiarity of something I had stopped really feeling because I had stopped really looking at it. I had no savings worth mentioning. I had no plan, not because I lacked the intelligence to make one, but because somewhere in the accumulation of my upbringing and my environment and my unexplored assumptions about what was possible for a person like me, I had absorbed a philosophy that did not include the architecture of a designed life. I was, in the truest sense, drifting. And the terrifying thing about drifting is that it does not feel like drifting when you are in the middle of it. It feels like living. It feels like this is just what life is. The current carries you and you mistake the movement for direction, and the days become weeks and the weeks become years, and one morning you wake up and realize the river has been deciding where you go all along. And then I met Earl Shoaff. I want to tell you about this man because understanding who he was and what he did helps explain everything that came after. Earl Shoaff was a businessman, an entrepreneur, a man who had built real success in the world. Not the kind of success that is inherited or stumbled into, but the kind that is deliberately constructed through a particular way of thinking and a particular set of daily disciplines applied over time. He was successful in the external sense, certainly. He had the material evidence of a well-built life. But what struck me most about Earl Shoaff was not his bank account or his accomplishments. What struck me was the quality of his presence. He walked into a room and the room changed. Not because he was loud or dramatic or performing. He was none of those things. But because his inner world, his philosophy, his confidence, his genuine delight in the potential of other people, radiated outward in a way that you could feel before he had spoken a single word. He sat down across from me one afternoon, this man I had only just met, and instead of talking about himself the way successful people sometimes do, he began to ask me questions. Simple questions. Uncomfortable questions. What are your goals? What is your plan for your finances this year? What are you reading? What have you learned in the last 90 days that has genuinely changed the way you think? I remember sitting across from him, feeling simultaneously seen and exposed, as though a light had been turned on in a room I had been navigating in the dark. I did not have good answers to any of those questions. And Earl Shoaff, rather than judging me for that, smiled, not unkindly, not with condescension, but with a warm recognition of a man who had once been exactly where I was, and he said something that I have carried with me every day since. He said, "Jim, for things to change, you have to change. For things to get better, you have to get better. Don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. Don't wish for fewer problems. Wish for more skills. And don't wish for more opportunity. Wish for more wisdom to recognize the opportunity that is already all around you." I want you to let that land. I want you to feel the weight of it, because it is deceptively simple and it contains everything. For things to change, you have to change. Not the economy, not your boss, not your neighborhood, not your circumstances. You. And I know that for some people, hearing that can feel like blame, as though saying that you are responsible for your own transformation means that everything that has been difficult in your life is your fault. That is not what I am saying, and it is not what Earl Shoaff was saying to me that afternoon. Life is not fair. Circumstances are not equal. Some people begin from positions of extraordinary advantage, and others begin carrying burdens that no person should have to carry. That is true, and I will not pretend otherwise. But, and this is a crucial but, what I have observed across a lifetime of studying human potential is that the people who transform their lives are almost never the people who had the easiest starting position. They are the people who, regardless of their starting position, made a fundamental decision that they were going to take responsibility, not blame, responsibility, for the direction of their own becoming. There is a world of difference between blame and responsibility. Blame looks backward. It assigns fault and finds its comfort in the assigning. Responsibility looks forward. It acknowledges reality as it is and asks, given this reality, what am I going to do? Blame is powerless. Responsibility is the source of all power. And the moment you make the shift from one to the other, the moment you stop waiting for the world to rearrange itself into something more favorable and start asking what you can do with exactly what you have, is the moment your life begins to genuinely change. Now here is something I want you to think about very carefully, and I will offer it as a question because questions, in my experience, do far more productive work in the mind than statements ever can. What has your daily philosophy been producing? Not the philosophy you would write down if someone asked you to articulate your beliefs, but your actual, lived, daily philosophy. The one that is revealed in your choices, your habits, Your responses to difficulty, your use of time, your patterns of thought when no one is watching. Because every life is the product of a philosophy, whether that philosophy was consciously chosen or unconsciously absorbed. And if you look at the results your life has been producing, in your health, your finances, your relationships, your sense of purpose, and those results are not what you want them to be, the answer is not to work harder within the same philosophy. The answer is to examine the philosophy itself, to understand where it came from, to evaluate whether it actually serves the life you want to build, and if it does not, to begin the fascinating and challenging work of replacing it with something better. This is one of the most important things we will explore together on this channel, and I want you to stay with me, subscribe if you haven't already, because in a few minutes I'm going to give you a specific process for auditing your daily philosophy and beginning to redesign it from the ground up. Let me tell you something about the way philosophy works in practical terms, because I think it is easy to use that word and let it float in the abstract, disconnected from the Tuesday morning reality of your actual life. Your philosophy is not something that lives in a library or a lecture hall. It lives in the micro-decisions you make every single day. It lives in the moment when your alarm goes off and you have a choice between getting up and beginning the day with intention or hitting the snooze button and surrendering the first hour of your day to grogginess and habit. It lives in the moment when you are tired in the evening and you have a choice between reading something that will expand your thinking or disappearing into entertainment that asks nothing of you. It lives in the moment when a difficult conversation needs to be had with someone you love and you have a choice between the temporary comfort of avoidance and the more demanding but ultimately more respectful path of honest engagement. Every one of these moments is a philosophical act. Every choice you make in these moments either affirms or contradicts the philosophy you say you hold. And the accumulation of these micro-decisions, across days and weeks and months and years, is what your life actually is. Not your dreams. Not your intentions. Not the person you would be if the circumstances were different. The accumulation of your actual choices, that is your life. And that is both the most sobering and the most liberating thing I know. Sobering because it means there is nowhere to hide from the evidence of your own choosing. Liberating because it means that every single day, including today, starting from this moment, you have the opportunity to begin making different choices, and those choices will begin, slowly and then rapidly, to produce different results. Now I want to spend a significant amount of time on something that I think is perhaps the most misunderstood element of personal growth, and that is the concept of the compound effect. People understand compound interest in finance. They understand that a small amount of money invested consistently and allowed to grow over time produces results that are disproportionately large relative to the total amount invested. What they do not always transfer is that this exact same principle governs every dimension of human development. Every book you read compounds. Every disciplined choice you make compounds. Every difficult conversation you engage in honestly instead of avoiding compounds. Every hour you invest in your physical health compounds. Every relationship you nurture with genuine care and attention compounds. And here is the extraordinary thing, and I want you to really sit with this: the compounding does not happen in a straight line. For a long time, it is almost invisible. You make the choices, you do the work, you invest the time and the energy, and the results are modest. Barely visible. Easily discourageable. This is the period that weeds out the people who are merely interested in change from the people who are genuinely committed to it. Because being merely interested means you will do what is convenient. Being genuinely committed means you will do what is required, even when the evidence of its working is not yet available to your senses. The people who push through this invisible period, who maintain the discipline when the results are not yet visible, who trust the process when the process has not yet produced obvious proof, are the people who eventually experience the remarkable acceleration that compound growth produces. And when it comes with a speed and a richness that genuinely surprises even those who believed in it all along. Let me give you a picture of this that I have used with audiences for many years because it illustrates the principle in a way that stays with you. Imagine a single penny, a single copper cent, and imagine that this penny doubles in value every day for 30 days. On day 1, you have 2 cents. On day 5, you have 32 cents. On day 10, you have a little more than $5. At this point, if you are watching a friend go through this experiment and you have been watching them double their penny every day for 10 days and all they have to show for it is $5, you might reasonably conclude that the doubling strategy is not very impressive. On day 15, you have $328. Better, but still not dramatic. On day 20, you have a little over $10,000. Now things are getting interesting. And on day 30, through the pure, relentless, patient application of doubling one day at a time, you have $536 million. The principle did not change. The daily action did not change. What changed was the time allowed for the compounding to work. Now I am not promising you $500 million from 30 days of reading. But I am telling you this, the person who has been reading 30 minutes a day every day for 3 years is not 3 years more informed than the person who has not been reading. They are living in a fundamentally different intellectual universe. They see things the non-reader cannot see. They make connections the non-reader cannot make. They have built a mental architecture that produces insights, opportunities, and capabilities that are not available to someone who has not done the same work. The compounding is real. This is connected to something that Earl Schoaf taught me very early in my development, and that I have since passed on to everyone I have ever had the privilege of mentoring. He called it the discipline of affirmation, not in the shallow, feel-good sense that the word sometimes carries, but in the deep, philosophical sense of regularly, deliberately, and specifically affirming to yourself who you are becoming and what you are committed to. Not who you are right now, not your current results, but the direction you are moving, the person you are in the process of becoming, the commitments you are choosing to live by. Because the mind is deeply responsive to repetition. Whatever you tell it consistently, it eventually begins to accept as true. And what it accepts as true, it begins to organize your perceptions and your choices around. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience. The brain is a pattern recognition and pattern reinforcing organ, and the patterns it reinforces most strongly are the ones that are fed most consistently. Feed it consistently the story of a person who is disciplined, who is growing, who is becoming, and it will begin to find evidence for that story everywhere. In your actions, in your opportunities, in the way you interpret the events of your days. Very soon I am going to share with you something that I have never fully articulated in quite this way before, a specific framework for what I call designing your days with intention, which is the practical expression of everything we have been discussing. But before we get there, I want to stop and acknowledge something. I know that some of you who are watching this today are not watching from a position of simple aspiration. Some of you are watching from a position of genuine difficulty. Maybe you have lost something, a job, a business, a relationship, a person you loved. Maybe you are dealing with a health challenge that has forced you to rethink everything you thought you knew about your future. Maybe you have made a significant mistake, the kind that has consequences that extend beyond your own life into the lives of people who trusted you, and you are living in the weight of that. I want to speak to you, specifically. Not past you, not around you, but directly to you. Because the message of personal development is sometimes presented in a way that implies it is for people who are already doing reasonably well and simply want to do better. As though it were a kind of enhancement for the comfortable, a polish on the already shinning. That has never been my understanding of it. The philosophy I have devoted my life to communicating was born in struggle. It was forged in the heat of failure and debt, and the particular kind of pain that comes from looking at the distance between who you are and who you had hoped to be. And everything I know, everything I have seen work in the lives of real human beings facing real human difficulties, tells me that the principles of growth, of daily discipline, of designed living, of quality association and continuous learning, these principles do not merely work despite difficulty. They work most powerfully in the presence of difficulty. Because difficulty is the precise context in which philosophy, character, and disciplined action make the most measurable difference. Let me tell you about a man I once knew. I will not use his name because the specific identity matters less than the pattern, who came to one of my seminars years ago in a state of what can only be described as organized collapse. He had built a business over 15 years that had employed more than 60 people, that had been the primary source of not just his own income but his identity, his sense of purpose, his daily reason for getting out of bed. And then, through a combination of market forces outside his control and decisions inside his control that he had not made wisely, the business failed. It failed publicly, the way business failures sometimes do, with suppliers and employees and partners all witnessing the unraveling. And this man, who had spent 15 years being the most capable person in every room he walked into, found himself sitting in the back of my seminar room looking like a man who was not entirely sure why he was there or what there was left to build. He told me later that he had almost not come, that he had sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before walking in because some part of him believed that seminars about building success were for people who still had a foundation to build on, and that his foundation was rubble. But he came in. And what happened over the course of that day, not magically, not dramatically, but quietly and persistently, was that he began to reframe his relationship to his own history. He began to see that everything the failure had taken from him was external. The business was gone. The money was largely gone. The reputation had taken a serious blow. But the 15 years of learning, the understanding of how businesses work, the knowledge of what mistakes not to make, the resilience that had been built through years of navigating genuine difficulty, none of that was gone. All of that was still entirely his. And when he shifted his attention from what the failure had taken to what it had left him, the picture of his future changed entirely. He rebuilt. It took several years, and it was not easy, and it did not look exactly like what he had before. But what he built was, by his own account, better, not just financially but in terms of purpose, wisdom, and the kind of depth that only comes from having gone all the way down and found that you still had something worth bringing back up. I tell you that story not to suggest that rebuilding is simple or that pain is not real. The pain was real for that man, and it is real for many of you. I tell it because I want you to understand something about the nature of human capital, the accumulated skills, insights, relationships, and resilience that you carry inside you, and the fact that it is extraordinarily difficult to destroy. External circumstances can take away almost everything that is visible. They cannot take away who you have become in the process of living your life. And who you have become, even if who you have become includes someone who has made serious mistakes and suffered serious consequences, contains the raw material for something genuinely worthwhile. The question is always the same question. What are you going to do with what you have? Now let me begin to lay out what I call the architecture of a transformed life. I want to be very specific here, because I believe that one of the greatest disservices done to people in the name of personal development is the offering of beautiful ideas without practical structure. Ideas are essential. I would never diminish the power of a great idea to change the direction of a life. But ideas without structure are like seeds without soil. They have the potential for extraordinary things, and they produce nothing. The structure I am going to offer you has 5 major pillars, and I want to go through each one not just in principle, but in the specific, practical terms of what it looks like in a real human life on a real human day. The first pillar is what I call a compelling vision, and I want to spend considerable time here because I think it is the most foundational and the most frequently misunderstood. When I say vision, I do not simply mean a goal. Goals are part of vision, but vision is larger than goals the way a cathedral is larger than any single stone that comprises it. A vision is a rich, emotionally vivid, spatially and sensory-specific picture of the life you are building, not just what you will have, but who you will be, how you will feel, what your days will look and sound and feel like when you have become the person your best life requires. I want to distinguish this from fantasy, because the word vision sometimes gets conflated with wishful thinking, and I want nothing to do with wishful thinking. Fantasy is passive. It is what you imagine happening to you if everything were to somehow arrange itself in your favor without your active participation. Vision is active. It is the future you are designing and building and working toward with specific, daily, disciplined intention. The way to know whether what you have is a vision or a fantasy is this: a vision makes demands on your present. A fantasy makes no demands at all. If the picture of your future life that you carry in your mind requires you to change, to develop new skills, to build new habits, to make different choices, to become a different kind of person, then it is a vision. If it simply imagines that everything somehow gets better without requiring you to change at all, it is a fantasy, and it will not serve you. Here is the practice I recommend for developing a compelling vision, and I recommend it not as a one-time exercise but as an ongoing, living discipline. Set aside 1 hour, not 5 minutes, one full, uninterrupted, phone-off, quiet hour, and write. Write in as much detail as you can manage the picture of your life 5 years from now if everything were to go the way it should. Not perfectly, life is never perfect, but the way it should go if you make the choices and do the work that you know you are capable of. Write about your health. What does your body feel like? What are you capable of physically that perhaps you are not capable of now? Write about your finances. What is your income? What is your net worth? What does your relationship with money look like? Write about your relationships. Who are the people in your life? How do you relate to the people you love? What is the quality of your most important connections? Write about your work. What are you doing every day? What problems are you solving? What value are you creating? What does the work make you feel? Write about your inner life. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? What do you believe about yourself and the world? What is your relationship with the quiet moments of your own experience? Write until you have a picture that feels genuinely true, not comfortable, but true. Not easy, but possible. Not certain, but worth building toward. And then read that picture back to yourself every single morning. Not as a wish, as a design brief, as the architectural plan for the project you are working on every day. The second pillar is what I have always called the discipline of daily investment, and I want to be very specific about what this means in practice because I think the word discipline often gets treated as a kind of motivational term, something that sounds good in a speech but dissolves in the reality of a busy, complicated life. Discipline, as I understand and practice it, is simply the commitment to doing specific, identified, high-value activities every day regardless of how you feel about it. And I want to linger on that phrase, regardless of how you feel, because it is where most people break the contract they have made with their future self. We live in a culture that has elevated feeling above almost everything. If it feels good, do it. If it does not feel good, question whether it is worth doing. And I understand the impulse. I am not arguing for a life of joyless grinding. Joy matters enormously in a well-designed life. But the problem with making feeling the primary criterion for action is that the feelings we have on any given morning are the product of our recent history, our current circumstances, our sleep quality, our blood sugar, and a dozen other variables that have nothing to do with what actually matters most. The person who only reads when they feel like reading reads very little. The person who only exercises when they feel motivated exercises very little. The person who only works on their most important project when inspiration strikes produces very little of their most important work. Discipline bridges the gap between feeling and action, and in doing so it produces results that feeling-dependent behavior never can. Let me give you a very concrete picture of what disciplined daily investment looks like in practice. Every morning, and I mean every morning, not the mornings when everything is going well, but genuinely every morning, I begin with what I think of as the investment hour. The first hour of the day is not given to the news, not given to social media, not given to the demands of email or the requests of other people. It is given entirely to my own development. Part of that hour goes to reading, always something of substance, something that challenges my thinking or deepens my understanding of something that matters to me. Part of it goes to reflection, reviewing my goals, reviewing the picture of the life I am building, asking myself what I need to do today to take one step closer to that picture. Part of it goes to planning, identifying the 2 or 3 things that, if I do them today, will make today genuinely worthwhile in the context of what I am building. Not 20 things. Not a sprawling list of tasks that produces the illusion of productivity without the substance of it. 2 or 3 things that genuinely move the needle. And I begin those things first, before anything else, before the day has a chance to fill itself with other people's urgencies and the comfortable busyness that can masquerade as productive work. This practice, simple, undramatic, consistent, has produced more of the substance of my life than almost any other single habit I can name.